Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local.
To you all, thanks indeed for being here. Just a reminder for mobiles, if you could have them switched off, as it does interfere with our recording. We do record our meetings, and we also people can be listening on air at home, so that's what the on air is up there. When that's on, it means that people can be listening, and we welcome those that may be listening on air as well. So please be seated. Thank you. On opening the meeting, I have one apology from Councillor Mackenzie. Declaration of interest, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Item 15.2, major events, specifically 3 relating to my involvement as the director on each, with Encore Theatre Company, the Australian Musical Theatre Company, Australian Musical Theatre Festival rather, and the Launceston Competitions Association.
Thank you, Councillor Deputy Mayor. Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Mayor. 15.1, the small events sponsorship, particularly item 2 for the Launceston Tornadoes Basketball Club.
Thank you. And Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you. Also 15.1, Mayor, items PCA, I work with them.
Thank you. Councillor Dakey.
Item 15.1, small events, Balfour Burn, St Giles.
Thank you. Any other declaration of interest? No, thank you. Confirmation of the minutes. I'm happy to move the minutes of the meeting held on the 22nd of August. Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and Councillor Harris seconded. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That's all councillors present. That is carried. There's no deputations. There's no petitions. We do have a community report, and we welcome Miss Madeline Rose from co-director of All About Babies. So, Madeline, oh, there you are.
Very well appreciated $2,000 that you saw to give to us for our event. It was an inaugural event at the Albert Hall, August the 11th, 2019, just passed, and we had 700 people attend on the day for our first event ever, which was extraordinary. We had very last-minute funding. We had very last-minute opportunities to get things together. As the first event, it was very challenging to prove to everyone on the day that we would actually have attendance, that it would be worth their while, and that it would actually be an interesting event for families, parents and parents to be here in Tasmania, and especially within our community. Also, just to thank specifically our Deputy Mayor for putting forward that motion. We do really truly appreciate your help with that, and all of you that voted it in on the day, our most grateful and heartfelt thanks. We just wanted to also tell you that because of your grant, we were allowed to, and capable of, including 7 not-for-profits on the day, which was extraordinary. We had hoped to have 5, but we were able to have 7. So this was a real opportunity to share information, education, support groups, connecting our community, these parents and parents-to-be, with services that they may not know about. On the day, we had a number of health professionals, including the Royal Flying Doctor Service for dental care in rural communities, as well as general practitioners, the GP North, for antenatal care, things that some parents don't realise is actually available to them. Also, just wanted to say that many Tasmanian government agencies were there on the day as well, and for some of them, they funded it themselves, but for some of them, it was funded by our health minister, as well as Bridget Archer and also Wendy Askew. Both funded a whooping cough booster on the day, and of the 24 available, we administered 17 by Dr. Natasha Vavrick and nurse practitioner Jane Laidlaw. So that was a really important message to also get out. That is the family and the surrounding grandparents and aunts and uncles and visiting family members to a newborn that actually need this more than anyone at this time in our lives. Whooping cough is, of course, something that's come back and is a real concern for newborns. And finally, we were also able to include a number of support groups, including Launceston Dads Group, which we didn't even know about when we first started this project. And they're an amazing group of young men who come together and chat about how it is that life changes when you have a child. A lot of people focus on mum, which of course is important, and of course, you know, that was the funding or the founding reason that we created this event, but also dads. And I feel like dads and mums both experience postnatal anxiety or postnatal depression when they have a new child. It changes your life. It doesn't come with a manual, and no one knows what to expect until that little child arrives. And no one knows if it's going to be a good sleeper or if it's going to be a good feeder until you actually get there on the day. We had organizations Australia-wide, we had Tasmania-wide organizations, and we had Launceston organizations. We also had organizations from the Northwest Coast, from the East Coast, and also from Hobart, as well as from Bridport. So it was a real community event. And just on that note, I don't believe that we've actually received the funds yet. So hopefully that invoice is received on your end, and we'll see that shortly. But also, just to note, we will be looking to apply for next year's small event grants for 2020. We will be doing this annually, and it is not an expo. It is a showcase event, and it is an information, education opportunity to share the wealth and knowledge of what is available in our community, in our state, and in Australia to support these young parents as they go about this journey of creating life, nurturing babies. These babies may be the next mayor. These babies may be the next councillor member. These babies may be a part of a theatre group. These children that are being born today are our future, and these parents that are raising them have all this available to them if they only know about it. So I feel like we have done the best service that we can, especially for our inaugural event. And again, we definitely feel so grateful for you and your help and the $2,000 that you gave to us. And we look forward to letting you know more about our 2020 plans as they come about. And if you have any thoughts that you'd like to check out who was there on the day, our exhibitor page is still live on our website, www.allaboutbabiestasmania.com.au. So if you go on that and you click on the exhibitors page, you will see all the logos and all the businesses that were there on the day. If you click on their logos, it takes you to their website, and you'll see the information and the education that we actually offered on the day. It's a very powerful message that we had on that day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madeline, and well done to yourself and all those involved in organising. Please pass on our thanks to the whole committee and everybody involved. Really appreciate it, and as you say, that very important for our community going into the future. Hopefully it won't be the next mayor, it'll be a future mayor coming through.
Well, I don't know that we're going to have a 10-month-old next year. But,
no, thank you very much.
Louise Paget and Zoe Freshwater both sent their thanks as well.
Well done, thank you. So we have public questions on notice there, then we have public questions without notice. So any public questions without notice? Just state your name and address, thank you.
Thank you. Glenda King, 5 Scott Street. I have 3 questions on...
Oh, what's that? No, what are you doing? No, this is question.
Sorry.
Just, I'm not sure what, anyway, we're right.
Am I on the right?
Yeah, you're right.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry, I can sit down if I'm not. And I will say that as my questions are maybe are a little detailed, I'm quite happy to, if you think they are better taken as to be on notice to be answered later. My first one concerns the 2013-14 report, which Council was part of, and I mentioned this earlier in relation to Councillor Daking's climate emergency motion, about the position and assessment of Launceston, and particularly in relation to the danger of loss of vegetation and the dangers that presented to Launceston's urban areas increasingly becoming heat sinks. And I was particularly prompted by Councillor Daking's comment about the fact that his child asked what his future would be like, and this is very much related to that. I know Council is doing projects on its own land, but the critical area is actually on privately owned land and vegetation that is on that. So given that the report highlighted the great potential for loss of vegetation on privately owned land, and we do have lands, increasingly blocks are being subdivided into smaller and smaller areas, vegetation is actually, vegetation is being lost as a result of that. I would like to know what controls Council is planning to implement within the new planning scheme to counteract this loss, given your recent endorsement of the climate emergency for this city, and how does Council propose to regulate and promote the retention of green cover on private property as an essential tool for value adding to our city and to help lessen the effect of increasing temperatures and heat retention in our urban areas?
Yeah, we'll take those on notice, as you've said.
You.
Thank you very much, and get back to you.
The second one relates to the article in the Examiner on Council's organisational alignment project, Seriously Entertain Change discussion paper. And it states that the Council will examine the future of 2 of its key major assets, one of those being the Queen Victoria Museum and Art Gallery. And it indicates that the Council may not be able to sustain the museum into its future, so it is looking at alternative options. My question is, when will information on the options for any proposed change in the relationship between QVMag and Council that will undoubtedly result in significant changes in the management of the QVMag be advised to the public and be available for public comment? Given the particularly strong interest and sense of community ownership of QVMag, and this was demonstrated very publicly and very dramatically pre-2009 when the public became deeply concerned after hearing proposals to close the museum's Royal Park site and potentially sell it off for hotel or a
Thank you.
department.
We'll answer the question. Thank you. General Manager.
Thanks, Mayor. So in terms of the process at the moment, so the organisational alignment project is foreshadowed that we need to complete this work. So it would be a review with a view to providing a structure to improve governance and I guess management capability in respect of the Museum and Art Gallery. So that will involve a public process. So and the actual timeframes and dates around that are yet to be established. But we are talking over a number of years to be able to make sure that we can put the rigour, bring people along on the journey on that and actually make sure that the right decision's made in the right way. So it's not something that you'll be rushing to deliver. It's something that we'll do and do carefully and make sure we do it right.
Thank you.
Thank you. I did have one further sentence on that, and that was concerning the QVMag staff and how they would be transitioned as part of this process. And it's probably, I realise now from your statement,
Yep.
Mr Stretton, that it's too early to answer that question.
Thank you.
But thank you. And my last question relates to, again, to the article and to the restructure. And it was mainly in relation to, given that significant organisational change always costs in many ways, not just financial, have the costs for this organisational change been budgeted for? When will Council be able to advise ratepayers of the likely expenditure for these? And does the organisational alignment project envisage an increase in Council personnel costs overall? Thank you. That's my question.
General Manager.
Thanks, Mayor. Look, it's too premature to be able to discuss the budgetary outcomes of this process because at the moment it is a proposal that is being considered by staff, and so for me to stand here and to provide information in respect of the budgetary implications would be inappropriate. So certainly we are aware of what the scenarios might be. Clearly it's public money. It will be obviously made fully available for public to be able to understand what the implications are. But again, we need to wait until the process has run its course. There's a definite decision made, and we know with certainty, what the impacts are.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you. Any further questions?
Smart Novel just relates to the vegetation protection plan on 14 and 16 St George's Terrace. Can Council just clarify for me what structure will be put in place to ensure that the plan is prepared by suitably qualified arborists, say Cert 3, if it will comply with the appropriate Australian standard, and whether it will be inspected in the course of demolition and construction just to avoid any repetition of unfortunate accidents where damage is done without notification. So, thank you.
Yeah, these questions are being heard by all the councillors, and obviously we'll consider those in our discussion on the item which is coming up shortly. Thank you. And the councillors can ask the question if they need clarification. Any further questions from the public?
My name is Robin Smith. I work at Coffee Republic in the Brisbane Street Mall. I've got two questions that relate in some way to the Brisbane Street Mall. Forgive me, I'm just reading some notes from the first question is about people sleeping rough on CBD streets, particularly the Brisbane Street Mall, that I've noticed over the last 3 or 4 months. That's people that are not just homeless, but they're actually living outside, and that is on, say, council land, so they're actually sleeping on footpath or in the entrance of, say, Birchall's or some other entrance way. And I understand they have complex needs, and it's a matter that has somehow recently embarrassed council, but it's nowhere connected to that issue. I'm asking today, what more could council do for people that are consistently seen sleeping more or less in the same few spots around the city, particularly the mall? And has council exhausted every opportunity it has to assist those people in what undoubtedly is a wretched existence?
Yeah, council is going to continue to work with agencies, and we will do that with the agencies. We've with the issue that you mentioned previously about the gentleman in the mall and what happened there, we have been in discussion with different agencies regarding him, with the City Mission, Anglicare, etc. They have followed him up, and he chooses to sleep this way, and that's something that we can't force the issue to make him do that. Unless you want to do that, that's your choice. But what we have done is work with the agencies. There was another lady that was sleeping in the mall. The agencies came and helped her, and she was willing to go and get help, and that happened last week as well. So we'll continue to do that. We're going to arrange a meeting with the agencies to see how we can further work together and make sure that we have got the connections in place and our staff are properly aware of what the procedures are.
Thank you. Then a follow-up question to that. There was a lady last night, I believe, who slept in the mall, who had 2 little puppy dogs, awful dogs. I don't know if that's the same, but there is a certain tendency to see the same individuals on an extended basis. So it seems to return and it doesn't seem to be resolved currently. But thank you. The second is about the Brisbane Street more generally. It's about a year since the mall was finished, and I've asked many questions before. One of them, and you did answer that you were going to install some plant pots and things. But I feel that the mall, from having spoken to people over the last year, certainly, and those that have no issues to raise other than the fact it doesn't quite look as one would hope the city centre mall to look. Certainly in comparison with the Civic Square here, it seems to fall short. I've mentioned that before, that the term I used didn't quite hit the spot. We've lost the flags, clock, tourist poster, tourist map, and generally a feel of it being a mall that is attractive. What more, other than the plants, and I thank you for that, and it will be greatly received when you do put some in, what more do you think council could do? Is there anything more they could do to brighten up the mall? And a great challenge from online. Sorry,
it's a challenge. It is a challenge for us, and if you've got some great ideas, we're happy to have those. So come forward with a positive idea, more than happy to look at that. We are continuing to work with some of the retailers in there, and we're looking at ideas, obviously with some of the vacant shops as well, and can't say a lot at this stage, but there are plans in place to try and make something happen, and something that I believe would be good for the city. So we've just got to be patient and wait for that. But if anybody in the public has ideas on something else that we could be doing, please let us know, and we're more than happy to follow through on it.
Thank you.
Any other questions? So under the provisions of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993, Council acts as a planning authority in regard to the items 8 on the agenda. And the first one is 8.1, and we have some speakers for 8.1. So, General Manager, if you could read out the rules, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Only residents and ratepayers or those on the City of Launceston electoral roll may address an item on the agenda. Before speaking, please state your name and address or property owned in Launceston. You may speak for up to 2 minutes. No extension of time is permitted. You must speak for or against the recommendations and not ask questions of councillors or council officers, nor attempt to enter into debates with councillors or council officers. Statements can only be made either directly relating to supporting the recommendation or arguing against it. Comments and statements are not to be defamatory, offensive or abusive, or be designed to embarrass any person, including councillors or council officers. Statements are not to be repetitive of statements or points already made. Several people speaking a common position should nominate a single speaker on their behalf. The Mayor may ask a member of the gallery to cease speaking if the above procedures are not followed. Following hearing the comments from the gallery, councillors will then consider the item.
Thank you, General Manager. James Stewart.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Councillors. My name is James Stewart and I'm a town planner representing Christy Seymour in relation to the St George's Square demolition application. At the outset, we wish to make clear that we agree and support the recommendation for the demolition approval. We do, however, have some concerns regarding the viability of conditions in relation to the proposed demolition. As you are aware, Christy Seymour removed the brick wall with the intention of cleaning the old bricks and reconstructing the wall from scratch. Over time, the wall had significantly deteriorated to the point where a visible lean was obvious to passers-by. Christie went ahead with the removal of the wall on the basis that replacing like for like did not require planning approval from the council. This was confirmed in writing to Christie by a council officer. Upon removal of the wall, Christie provided a timeline to council which stated the wall would be rebuilt within 6 months. Council's manager of compliance also inspected the removed bricks, which were in the process of being cleaned, prior to the reconstruction commencing. Council's manager of compliance has raised no issues or concerns with the time period proposed or that the bricks are currently being cleaned. Putting aside the fact that the recommended conditions are already considered reasonably onerous for a dwelling demolition, we accept and are happy to work with the majority of these put forward. We do, however, have objection to the council requirement of rebuilding the wall prior to the demolition of the dwelling occurring. On a practical level, trying to carry out demolition of the dwelling around a newly constructed brick wall is near impossible and would likely result in damage to the new wall. A condition which simply required the rebuilding of the wall within 6 months would be a far more appropriate and practical outcome. This would still give the council suitable control, however would allow the demolition to commence without any further delay. Christie has also indicated that she will be willing to offer a bond to council as further demonstration of her willingness to rebuild the wall. In conclusion, I note that Christie has already come to the table by agreeing to rebuild the original wall at a significant additional cost to herself. With the intent being to reconstruct a new dwelling on the site, all Christie wants to do is push on and get the appropriate approvals in place so her and her family can move back home. We request that council take all these matters into consideration when making their decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeanette Gatenby.
Thank you. Jeanette Gatenby, 49 High Street, East Launceston. Firstly, I'd like to commend Duncan Payton for his report on the current DA, and I particularly note point 2A, required prior to commencement of works, specifically completion of the reconstruction of the brick wall, and point 3, fencing of St George's Square frontage. Mr Payton presents valid reasons why this must occur prior to the demolition of the house, referencing the Scenic Management Code. It's essential that this happens before the demolition of the house is approved, the rebuild of the wall. As there's no plan submitted to inform us when the developer plans to build a house or units on this land, chances are the visual impact of the streetscape will be severely and adversely impacted upon for a long period of time. Imposition of a bond to ensure rebuild of the fence at the end of any new build does not alleviate that situation. If the wall's not replaced prior to demolition, there's no incentive for the developer to ever replace it. Financial penalties have no restraint on determined developers, as recently seen with the destruction of the Mount Stewart house in Hobart, where the developer was prepared to take the brunt of the fine. The developer states publicly she does not want to rebuild it prior to the demolition, as we've just heard also. She does not need access from St George's Square to access the site for demolition. There's substantial unfenced frontage onto Scott Street. A house in the parallel street in Spencer Street is currently doing major work on it, and it just uses access from that very narrow street as well. I urge the council requires the wall to be rebuilt to the original design and using bricks from the period. There are bricklayers who can replicate the original laying pattern. As a condition of approval of this current DA, the developer should be required to present a plan for this reconstruction of the wall using appropriate heritage techniques and materials, and that this plan be approved by council before any works start on the reconstruction of the wall, and certainly before any further demolition work is undertaken on the site. Thank you for your consideration of this matter, which has caused a lot of angst and unhappiness in the community.
Mark Melville, please. Sorry? Okay, thank you. Linda King.
Glenda King, 5 Scott Street. I'm speaking to you today to present a case for the retention of James Rogers' modernist house at 16 St George's Square. So why do I disagree with the recommendation to demolish it? Broadly, I feel the assessment in the papers does not give adequate value to the existing residence, which is a unique example of international modernist style, and it's rare in Launceston. One of the reasons given, it's not heritage listed. That is not the only reason you allow a building to be preserved. There are legal precedents with the case of, for example, known commonly as the Nettlefold case in Hobart, where a non-listed building was deemed in the Supreme Court to be able to be not demolished. And that was through a judgment of 3 eminent justices. So the case, there are precedents here. The other thing is the buildings had additions. I would ask any of you to show me a heritage listed house in Launceston that does not have contemporary additions. We venerate the Bennell townhouses. Some have had second stories added. dormer windows removed, added on, bits on the back. They're not unique, but we consider them part of our heritage. The other point listed was it's incongruous in the streetscape. It doesn't fit in. Go around St George's Square and look at all the buildings. Everyone is a unique architectural feature, and this is no different. And it has contributed significantly to the acknowledgement that the square was listed in the National Estate Survey of 77 and also in the Heritage Report. There's adaptive reuse. That's encouraged in your 2007 report, and it also fits very nicely within the climate emergency. Why pull down a perfectly good building that can actually be readapted and extended to meet the developer's need? Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Jenny Davidson. I live at 54 Ann Street, known as Torkington, formerly Fairview. My opposition to this DA is only in the terms of the councillors don't have enough information to actually adequately assess the demolition. We've had 2 arborist reports. The last one was only yesterday, so I wasn't able to give it to council. Both of them are concerned about this demolition. As you're probably aware, the TPZ of our trees is at least 12 metres, which is actually into the house itself. The SPZ is at 4.5 metres, which is just where the house sits. Now, unless we have a really thorough arborist report saying the impact on our trees, like you're allowed apparently to have about a 10% incursion on the TPZ and it's okay, but we're looking at more than that, about a 30% incursion, which can seriously damage the trees and kill them. It's in our interest. We love the trees. They're National Trust heritage. Our whole property is national, state and local heritage. We love those trees. We don't want them damaged, and I'm sure Mrs Seymour doesn't either, but I think we really need to get a proper arborist report, and I'm happy for our arborist to work with Mrs Seymour's to see if there's a plan. Maybe, I mean, I'm not an arborist, maybe if we left the slab there and she could build on top of the slab, or there may be something that we can get round it, but we don't want the trees. I feel I'm a custodian of this property for everyone in the future, and I think those trees were there since 1880. Mr Payton made regard to the other buildings in the area. At 5 Scott Street, that used to be part of our property. It was the old croquet lawn. It was built in the 1880s, and they put a 3 feet wide fence deep to stop all the tree roots affecting their play. Later became the tennis court. That's still there. So when they did their property at 5 Scott Street, the roots were either so deep or deviated. The other properties at 18 and 20 St George's Square are well away from the TBZ, and the extensions done on the back of number 16, which were done about 20 years ago, were just squaring it off, no new things. Thank you. I decline to speak. Thank you.
54 N Street. My reading is actually prepared from arborist Mr. Frank Russell. This report shall conclude that the proposed development of the neighboring property in its current form will severely impact the heritage-listed sequoias and potentially cause the catastrophic failure of at least one of the trees and consequently cause potential struck damage to the property and injury/death to the personnel. No consulting arborist appears to have been engaged to ascertain best practice for trees so historical, so large, and so close to the development site. This is a glaring omission. Australian standards documentation is readily available to developers stipulating best practice for situations like this one. The proposed development makes significant intrusions into the important TPZ and may also impact SRZ. Major and intermediate roots of the trees are threatened by the plans for the new dwellings in ways that could potentially cause significant stress and damage to the trees. It would appear the sections the proposed new dwellings, exterior walls and the foundations are to be situated within 4-5 meters of the base of the trees, well within the TPZ and possibly reaching the vitally important SRZ. This would profoundly disturb the roots of the trees, potentially causing significant stress and potentially destabilizing the trees, causing a danger to nearby housing and personnel. The cutting and tearing of any larger roots within TPZ area has potential to undermine the tree's vitality and may cause shock and decline to Launceston landmark specimens. If these trees become degraded, seriously distressed, or die from the disturbances caused by the proposed development, the cost of the remedial works and removal would be many thousands of dollars, and possible legal ramifications may apply.
I'll just speak regarding the demolition of the house. This is not an anonymous house. It's architect designed by James Rogers, who was a principal and well-known Launceston firm, Tandy, Pryor and Rogers Architects. The residence was commissioned by and designed for the eminent Launceston surgeon and philanthropist T.G. Hogg, who made a very significant contribution to Launceston. I urge you to move an amendment to disallow the demolition and obliteration of James Rogers' work, or at least move a stay of execution until the building can be assessed as suitable for heritage listing. A house designed by a noted architect is a work of design creativity, no different to any other artwork. 16 St George's Square must be retained, readapted and recognised as outstanding, unique and worthy of presentation. Its modernist architecture should be preserved into the future. The house celebrates its 60th birthday this year, and this year should not be its use-by date. Thank you.
That's all the speakers I have. There's no other speakers. So, got on item 8.1. Oh, sorry, Director Hurst. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor. There are two changes to the conditions that are proposed in the agenda. Following today's bus trip, it has been identified that condition 3 should be modified by inclusion of a sentence as follows. Design and construction plans of the wall, including a schedule of materials, must be submitted to and approved by the Manager of City Development prior to commencement of construction. The second is a typographical error has been identified in condition 4. The change is to replace 56 Ann Street, as stated in the papers, with 54 Ann Street, which is the property of the subject trees.
Thank you. So it's 8.1. Do we have a motion? Councillor Finlay moves. Is there a seconder?
Second the pro forma.
Deputy Mayor, thank you. Question from Councillor Finlay.
I have two questions, thank you, Mayor, following the questions from the gallery today. My first question is clarification on condition 6, the supervision by the project arborist. Point A asks that prior to the commencement of works, they need to provide to the Manager City Development the written certification of the protection measures. Would that include that the assessment between now and when that certification is submitted, if it's found that the demolition will substantially impact the trees, that could cause an approved development application not to proceed?
Hurst.
Simply, is that the question is the, if approved today, is it conditional on that meeting the assessment, meaning that the trees won't be impacted?
Richard.
It's the view of council officers that the demolition of itself won't significantly impact on the trees if it's managed by a professional arborist. That's different to construction of a new house, which we don't know the location of. So the points that were raised by the speakers were about the new house entering into the zones and potentially damaging the existing house is already there, and we're removing something which, if done under the supervision of an arborist to approved and a plan, we believe will not have a detrimental impact on the trees.
I understand it. Thank you for answering the question. I think that the questions were raised in the concern of demolition works impacting the trees, but you've said that the assessment is okay, so I hear the answer. My second question is from a question that was raised around if, unfortunately, as a result of the demolition, prior to any development application or building works commencing, there is a substantial failure in the trees. There was a question around if a tree has to be removed or if there's any works for that. How then would those costs be managed?
Director Hurst.
I just want to clarify what the question is, if that's okay, Councillor Finlay.
Sure. So if the development application is approved today, and if condition 6 is satisfied, and unfortunately there's, I think the word was catastrophic, but if there's a failure in the tree, and the tree therefore has to be removed to be safe, or it comes to the end of its life as a result of the demolition, how would the costs of removal... There was a question from the gallery around the costs if the tree fails, and I hadn't thought about that. Having heard the question, I wondered who would then bear the costs of that action if it was subject to an approved DA.
Director Hurst.
It's our understanding that would become a neighbour dispute under the remind me of the legislation that neighbour, the dispute about neighbour vegetation. It would come under separate legislation.
Thank you. Councillor Finlay, do you wish to speak? Well, you're the mover.
Yeah, cool. There's no other questions?
Not at this stage.
Okay. So there's no doubt that this item before us today is both simple and complex. It simply is an application to demolish. However, it's done within the context of a complex layer of strong community concern. And so council need to consider the application before us purely in alignment with the planning scheme, in a way that we make a lawful decision, but also a decision that is cognizant of the strong community expectations and is also reasonable for the developer. So there's a number of layers in our consideration today, and that makes the decision-making process challenging, I suppose. So for me, in it being presented purely on what's being requested and also what's being stated, for it to be put on record at the council meeting today that it is the intention of the developer to reconstruct the wall. The words like for like were used, and using the cleaned bricks. That, although it's disappointing that the wall's no longer standing, I think that it's on record in a formal council meeting. It doesn't necessarily bring comfort, but is positive that at the conclusion of the demolition process and at whatever the decision is made today, that there will be a wall that is representative of the wall that once stood. There's been a long conversation in consideration of this item around the timing of the fence, and I'll speak to the fence first and then the demolition second. And there has been a lot of regard for the timing in terms of satisfying community concern and providing ease of access for the developer. Our planner has given great consideration to both what a lawful decision would be and what an appropriate decision would be. It's the recommendation of the officers that the wall be built prior to the commencement of any demolition works. That we've included the sentence around the design and the consideration for materials being approved by the manager city development, I think is appropriate and not inconsistent with what has been stated today in terms of the intentions of the developer. So it's just a matter of timing. I think given the pathway to this point, it's reasonable to expect the wall be rebuilt first. So that's where I sit with that element of the planning application before us. In terms of the demolition, I think it's disappointing that the property has been identified for demolition, but understandable. I think at a personal position, not necessarily a planning decision, but it's a fantastic, it has been in the past a fantastic property and a fantastic representation of that international modernist period, and I personally quite like that. So I think it's disappointing, but I think it's also understandable. So the demolition in itself is what we're considering, so that part I'm okay to move on with. And then it's the trees. So I think the wall and the trees for me are the significant part, because the demolition is almost simple. And the protection of the significant trees that are not only historically important to the property, important to the skyline, the scenic protection, and just in keeping with the area and its significance to Tasmania, not just to the square. Whatever we can do to make sure that there isn't a detrimental impact to the tree is our responsibility. So I believe that the planner, giving due regard to that, has included a number of conditions that, if followed and followed by qualified people, should either protect the tree, or if at the point that the tree it becomes aware that it's actually no longer going to protect the tree, that work should stop. And that was why I asked that question around condition 6. So at any point in this process, if this development application is supported today, in whatever way we can most strongly signal to the project arborist and to the people that are then monitoring the reports of the arborist that everything needs to happen to ensure the longevity of the trees. So there was a big pause when the Mayor asked for someone to move the motion. There was no action at the table, so I put my hand up to move it. It is complex and simple at the same time. For the wall, I think, although I'm sure to the developer it's disappointing that there'd be a request that the wall get rebuilt now, I think given the strong community concern, the legality and the streetscape nature of that, it is appropriate for us to consider that. I think the demolition, although disappointing, is understandable, and I think really the wall will be rebuilt at some point, whatever the decision is. The trees can't be replanted. So for me, really strong messages to the people responsible that the trees are protected in every possible way, to the absolute requirement of the legislation and the law.
Excuse me, your time's up to that extension?
I finished.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks.
Sorry then. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I don't have a lot to add other than to say that this item has certainly engendered a great deal of community response. In fact, for me, perhaps one of the largest number of representations for any item that I've considered as a part of this council, certainly as a member of the Planning Authority. There's no denying that the pathways that have been travelled could have been taken on a different route and could have perhaps engendered more trust from those representatives who have spoken of the wall and of the demolition and of the architectural style that's currently there, and importantly of the trees. I would encourage, as has been the case throughout this project, that if today the demolition is supported, that members of the community who have been so vocal in contacting the council continue to monitor, continue to ring, continue to email if you see there are things happening at the site that you are concerned with. If you believe that any matters that are approved as per the conditions today are not being upheld, feel free to continue to include all of us in your communications with officers of this council, because the conditions, if approved today, are the conditions. There's no deviating from the conditions. There's no choosing to do your own thing and then seek forgiveness after the conditions are approved today. It's our job to ensure that the conditions are adhered to, and it's the job of the developer to ensure that they understand what the conditions and the order of things to be undertaken in line with the conditions are completed by. So it's my understanding, and what I've supported in order to get the conversation flowing, is particularly condition 2, point A, the completion of the reconstruction of the brick wall, prior to the commencement of the demolition works, and I stand by that. And, in terms of ordering and in terms of simple language, that's what I'm supporting today, and that's the condition that would be imposed upon the developer.
Thank you, Deputy. Councillor Walker, question?
Thank you. Yes, question. And that was in a number of questions in relation to Deputy Mayor, just quoting to Part A, the actual wording for that. Can we get the wording for the addition to that, change to that recommendation on the screen? Is that possible? Just so everyone, including ourselves, can quote it correctly, as well as for the audience. About other questions, I'm asking the Director, if we were to lay this on the table, do we have time to lay this on the table as a hypothetical question right now?
Not if you go by the deemed approval. It's extended until today.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Mayor.
Or tomorrow.
Yep.
6.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Director, but there's no discretionary aspects to this DA, are there?
Director Hurst.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Demolition itself is discretionary under clause 9.4 of the scheme.
Councillor Dawkins has a question.
Thank you, Mayor. When we were on site today and discussing condition 2A, the wall, there seems to be a little bit of confusion in the community, and I certainly came approach that with the sense that we would see the wall the way that it had been in situ prior to that wall being removed. Can you talk a little bit about what like for like means in this instance, and how close to a depiction of what that wall was like before the outcome is likely to be, please?
Director Hurst.
Thanks, Mayor. I'm just double checking, but I don't believe that the condition is worded to indicate like for like.
Apologies, like for like had come from the proponent. So that's how today, I believe you used those words, yes. So that's what the expectation is, that it would be like for like. But we don't genuinely believe that the wall is going to look the way that it did prior to it being removed, do we?
I cannot answer on behalf of the developer. What I can say is that the wall is not heritage listed, and in fact the consideration for this application is actually around the scenic management aspects, and so the fact that there is a solid wall across the front of the property is what has been assessed under this application. As it's not a listed feature, heritage listed feature, we cannot require that, but the addition of the subject to approval by the manager of city development enables us to have that conversation with the developer prior to approval of the proposal. And I will say that our indication is, and we are aware that a significant number of the bricks have been retained and are able to be reused to at least provide that facade that is in the same material as the wall that was demolished.
Thank you. Councillor Soward.
Thanks, Mayor. And like Councillor Finlay and Councillor Gibson, I share very similar thoughts to them, so I won't repeat what they said. When the agenda comes out and we have planning issues on here, I don't ever read it from start to finish. I always start at the end and then work my way backwards, because for me, I'm really, really interested in the issues that are raised and the officer responses to those issues, because as we always highlight, Mr Mayor, when we sit as a planning authority, we're bound to follow legislation as far as that goes. So in looking at the agenda item today, and I commend Mr Payton on his report and recommendations, on page 19 there were a couple of really, really key things in this for me. As we work our way through the comment there on page 19, it says in the report, and this is a really key thing, that the wall wasn't part of the planning application. It's not part of the planning application, and that's really, really important people understand that. But Mr. Payton's words there really resonate with me when he says that the demolition has altered the streetscape. The demolition has altered the streetscape. The dwelling proposed for demolition is now significantly more apparent in the streetscape, whereas previously it was largely hidden by the wall, and its contribution to the scenic aesthetic diminished by the significance and stature of the wall itself. Consequently, the demolition of the dwelling will now create a noticeable hole in the streetscape, making it difficult to be considered consistent with the purpose statements of the inner residential zone and the scenic management code respectively, to provide for the development that provides a high standard of amenity and contributes to the streetscape, and to ensure that the siting and design of development in scenic management areas is unobtrusive and complements the visual amenity of the locality and the landscape. So I just found that really, really interesting. Like the Deputy, when we sit around the table and there are representations made, sometimes we get a handful. I think in this case, I think we got 37. So that would suggest to me that this has been a very, very important issue for the people of that very significant community. And in reading through the issues and the responses, it's very, very clear that there obviously is a severe amount of angst around this, and obviously the process of removing the wall, whilst not part of the application, added to the angst and created angst that then led to other angst. And I've heard very passionately from the owners of Torkington, who've provided some information for us over a couple of meetings now about those trees, including the reference to the most recent arborist report of yesterday. So, to me, Mr. Mayor, I'm pleased with the conditions that we've put in here regarding the wall. I would also, again, reiterate my support for the protection of the trees, because one of the things is, and I'm sure that everyone involved, residents, the developer, neighbours, everyone, no one wants to see those trees damaged in any way. I'll be very, very confident of that. But sometimes in the process of demolishing something or doing something, accidents happen. You know, they do, accidents happen. Where human beings are involved, accidents happen, and the consequences of those accidents, or something being moved in the wrong direction or whatever, could be catastrophic as far as this goes. So the conditions in there and the information around the arborist information, I think, is very, very important. I always like to stand up, Mr. Mayor, and be supportive of development in this city. I think that one of the things that keeps our city vibrant and progressing is development, responsible development, sensible development. There's some things around this that just don't sit well with me. They don't. I do note, though, that in the report, where, again, it's measured against the scheme for demolition, everywhere I look, Mr. Mayor, it does say the word complies. So what's been in front of us today complies with the scheme. So, like the previous speakers, and I'm sure there'll be others to come, it's been a tricky one for me. Someone who likes to support positive development in our city, but also someone who does have some concerns around it, created by issues as part of the process so far. So I'll be very interested in what other speakers have to say.
Thank you. Councillor Soward. Any other speakers? Councillor Dakin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll try and summarise this because I know a lot of it has already been spoken about. As you know, we're talking about the DA demolishing an existing house. That's all. It's simple. But it's not. We've got a wall, we've got two trees, and we've got the house. We all want the wall and we all want the trees. But we can't restrict the owner to build or not to build, to renovate or not to renovate, to demolish or just simply live in the house as it is. I'd like to thank the applicant for their offer of offering a bond in regards to the wall, which shows the commitment to build the wall, rebuild the wall as it is. So thank you for that offer. I don't believe it can be legally accepted from the council. Is that correct? Yes, probably a question. No. Thank you. These trees are some of the most well recognised in the area. They have amazingly passionate protectors that we've met today. And they want to ensure that these trees all outgrow all of us. However, I do believe that the conditions contained within the DA go further to ensure they are left in the same, if not better shape for the future than they are today. And perhaps, like one of our speakers suggested, the applicant may speak to their arborist in the future and possibly work with their neighbours in ensuring that these trees remain safe. And they are the custodians. We all are the custodians of these trees. And I believe these trees are not just your trees, they're our trees, they're Launceston trees. A high standard of street amenity in regards to the application. Once the house is cleared and the wall is reinstated, I actually do believe there'll be no noticeable impact on the amenity. One could say that the amenity will actually become better because we'll have a better view of these beautiful trees. Just an observation. Currently, we all know the wall is not heritage listed. There is no potential ruling or application in the process to be heritage listed. There is no current scheme or overlay of zoning to suggest that there is a caveat over the wall, and we don't own the wall. The wall is owned by the applicant. The beautiful trees, however, they are 100% protected. They are amazing, and a major part of this DA is to ensure these beautiful trees are protected. Then there is the house, is what we're actually talking about today. Again, there is nothing that currently stipulates that the house must stay or the house could go. As I said, we all want to protect the trees. We want to see the wall built safe, and we all want to ensure that the demolition of this house doesn't affect the wall being rebuilt or the trees still standing safely. I can sympathise in regards to the modernistic design of the house. I myself have one. I love the architecture. Again, unfortunately, it doesn't form any heritage in relation to this application. I do notice that it formed part of a national estate, which was a report back in 1977. In 1977, though, this house would have only been 20 plus years old. Not even. I suppose in summary, it's a beautiful old wall, and it will be rebuilt with the same bricks, we hope, we believe, we've been told, like for like. The house, I love the design, as I said, but the DA is for the demo of the house only today, and that's all we're voting on. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you answer the question, Councillor Hurst? Or Director Hurst?
Thanks, Mayor. With respect to the question around whether a bond is possible, I guess the first thing I say is we don't have any policy to guide that. Technically, a mechanism could be a Part 5 agreement, but we really require further time to get legal advice if we were to consider going, if the council wished to consider going down that path, and officers don't believe that it's necessary if the conditions as recommended are approved.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to begin by, asking if, demolition is a discretionary decision, then what is wrong with this building? Are there cracks in the walls? Is it falling down? No, of course it's not. It's a building that's, been well admired, as some of the other councillors have said. I have to, put in a disclaimer. I certainly used to work at ABC just along the road there, and have quite often admired the building myself. And so why do I ask if there's anything wrong with this building? Well, I suppose it does go to some of the things that have been said from the gallery today, and that is that, it is changing times that we live in, and the council does have an active policy of adaptive reuse of buildings where possible. And with climate change and our carbon footprint still growing in this country, removing a perfectly good building to replace it with another building doesn't, on the face of it, make sense. It might make sense, of course, for a developer who can see that there is perhaps some amenity increase or perhaps some profit to be made in that process. But, you know, that is something that is only going to become potentially more problematic for councils when they look at demolition permits. But we'll go back to what we have at hand here, and we are obviously in a very fraught situation. It's played out poorly in the public arena. That may have been no one's particular choice, but it's created a very divisive situation in our community, which is not to anyone's benefit, including the developer and certainly including the council. It puts us obviously in a difficult position, and it's quite plain everyone is struggling with that. The wall is gone, of course. That's one aspect that is not directly related to the demolition of this building. And yet, not just the public, but also many members of the council would like to see that wall returned. We're talking about a like-for-like situation. That's not stipulated in this development application or this demolition application. Even though we are stipulating that the wall will be replaced to the satisfaction of the manager, it is almost impossible to stipulate that that wall be replaced like for like. That's another problem, again, not directly related to the demolition of this building. As a resident of Launceston, I own a property, you might own a property, and if you're really lucky, it's a part of our rich heritage and history. And while you might own that property, that heritage and history is shared by all of us. And that may include a modernist building, it may include an old red brick wall, but that's just how people in Launceston feel about our heritage. And you can't take that away from people. And when you try to, you will meet this resistance, hence the large amount of representations. There were, of course, alternative solutions. There's alternative solutions to demolishing the building. There are alternative solutions to removing that wall and rebuilding it. These weren't explored. It was unfortunate that they weren't explored. We might not have found ourselves in this situation where we're struggling to come to a clear, resolute decision. The carbon cost of demolishing a perfectly good house and replacing it might not seem like a lot, but when it's multiplied over and over in a municipality like Launceston, in a state like Tasmania, these things add up. You know, producing cement has one of the highest carbon footprints of any building material. Producing bricks, things like that, things that this house is currently made of. There are other things at play here, of course, the trees that people have talked about, so I won't go into that, but certainly I agree that we do need to take all steps to ensure that those trees do not just survive, but they thrive. There are questions about what a future development may look like on that property, whether a subdivision may be introduced, and you know, whether the property may be sold, undeveloped. We're not to know. We can't answer any of those questions. But these are all things that, unfortunately, in the way that this has been handled, now come to the surface.
Thank you. Your time is up. Any
Yes, Mayor, I would like... It's interesting that the developer's representative comes here today to question point. I'll have to find the exact 2A, the reconstruction of the brick wall. Yet, you know, we all know that that's actually not integral to the approval of the demolition, but we've certainly imposed it here, or we are seeking to impose it. And why are we seeking to impose that? Because it's been precipitated by actions that were not originating from this council. So there's a little bit of confusion around that too. I probably have said nothing that everyone around this table hasn't already thought. But at this point in time, I do not wish to support the demolition of this building. I'm not comfortable that the wall will be rebuilt like for like, as has been suggested by a representative of the developer. I'm not comfortable that we are in a position on council where we have to support demolition of perfectly good buildings just in the name of development. It may well be the case sometimes that someone can argue that point, but development for development's sake, when there is a cost to the environment, is something that we're all going to have to question as time goes on. I'm supportive of development, as Councillor Soward says, he's supportive of development, but in this particular case, I'm struggling to see how this particular development is of great benefit to the city, but I can certainly see how it could be of great detriment to this city. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll ask other councillors to consider that point of view. Thank you very much, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Walker. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor. And like everyone else, I was very conflicted with this development application. I must admit, when I saw the wall being demolished on TV, I was fairly incensed, and I wrote an email in anger. And like all good people, you never send that email in anger, you delete it, because it feels better to get it out sometimes. So, as many have said, what we're looking at here, three things: the wall, the trees, and the house. The house, for me, is, yes, it's an example of international modernist architecture, a period of about 50 years. There are many examples in Launceston of the architecture. In fact, Nick's saying he lives in one. My own childhood in West Launceston, we grew up with one just round the corner. It probably points to a greater problem that we haven't got a register of architectural styles and good examples of that for us to then protect. This house is not protected, and so therefore we have nothing but ourselves to blame, perhaps, for that occurring, and it is something we could look to fix in the future to ensure that Launceston does in fact have great examples of various periods of architecture. There's 13 items in the recommendation, but we really seem to get hung up on item 2A, and that is rebuilding the wall. I originally thought, why would you try to make a wall be rebuilt if you're going to allow demolition of the house? It is simply easier to access it from the St George's Square side rather than Scott Street. However, visiting today, access from Scott Street is in fact quite easy, and so therefore, whilst the wall might be inconvenient, it is certainly not impossible for the developer to demolish the house using access from Scott Street. So I think that is probably where I'm sitting at the moment, waiting for others to perhaps change my mind, if you can. But I think we do have really, as it's said, just simple things to look at. The demolition of the house is all we can do today. That's what we're approving. The building of the wall is a condition. It's the only lever we have to make her do that, or the developer do that. She has said she'll do it within 6 months. You only have to look at what happened in Boland Street to the two old cottages when the developer said I was going to build something, and then now, some years later, we're still looking at an empty block of land. And that, to me, is the fear that we have on St George's Square, that if we allow demolition without the rebuilding of the wall to a suitable standard that fits in with the other existing parts of the wall, as specified by the amendment, then we could be again looking at a big hole in the streetscape for many years to come. So with that, that'll be my support of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Any other speakers? Councillor Finlay, wish to close?
Thank you, Mayor. And with Councillor Harris being the previous speaker, he raised a really valid point in terms of there are two issues to do with the wall. One is the wall being reconstructed. The other is the timing of the reconstruction. And what Councillor Harris raises is in the event that we don't require that the wall is reconstructed prior to the demolition, then we could end up with a circumstance where there is a delay for whatever reason, either through process or through submission, that there is a piece of land that doesn't have improvement on it and that the fence isn't reconstructed. And for clarification in that, there's been reference a couple of times to 2A, the completion of the reconstruction of the brick wall. I think actually the pertinent matter is the timing, not the reconstruction. So it's actually condition 3 that's important for consideration here today, that occur prior to any demolition works. For me, having heard the contributions around the table, I'm clear to commend the motion to council. And I think it's important for anyone at this point still unclear that when we sit as a planning authority, there has to be a determination made in the positive. So we have to make a decision. In the absence of a decision in the positive, then the development application proceeds as though it was approved. So it's my recommendation to council that we accept the recommendations made by the planners to us today, and I commend the motion for consideration.
Thank you, Councillor Finlay. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Those against? That's 1 against, the rest are 4. That is carried. Councillors, if we could move on to 15.3, as we do have some speakers for 15.3. We've been waiting a while. Moved Councillor Soward. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Spencer. All those in favour, please raise your hand. 15.3. Thank you. Yeah. So I'm bringing it forward just because there's some people. We do have some speakers for 15.3. I'll just wait till those leave the room. Can't remember. Thank you, councillors. So we'll go on to 15.3. We have some speakers for 15.3. Mike Truathy. Get me tongue around it. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you for letting me speak today, councillors. Mike Truathy from 78 Coram Street, West Launceston. I'd just like to bring to the councillors' attention some of the probably unintended and onerous conditions or financial imposts that are being imposed on myself and other landowners in the area by proposed rezoning under the new planning scheme. What a bit of history of my block is, about 15 years ago, I purchased the land and I referred to the council prior to purchasing it about the ability to develop it, and I was told that as it was future urban, it could be developed. Shortly after that, we put in a subdivision plan for 5 lots, and we were told by council staff that no, they wanted 10 because of rate space situation. So we then submitted a plan for 10, and it was returned to us stating that the statewide planning process was starting. So we left it and sat on it for 5 years. 5 years later, I read in the paper that our land had been rezoned without any consultation with us or the other landowners around the time at all, and we were told by the council staff that it can be developed into 5 lots, which I was happy with. But then when we checked the fine print and we found that we really could only develop it into 1 block with any certainty, the other 4 were optional at the council's discretion. And we've now been told that the land is being placed in a zoning that will make it easier to develop it if it was in a national park, and it is totally the wrong zoning for this area. And I refer to an email from Peter Dingemans, our planner, who has been through this. Yep. We consulted statewide planning, and they agree that it is in the wrong zone, and we've had a meeting with LCC planning staff, which we haven't had a response from until we found out by accident today that the unchanged plan is being submitted to the council for ratification. Now, this land was purchased 20 years ago as my superannuation policy, and it's gone from 10 blocks worth approximately $200,000 each to 1 block, which is probably worth $200,000. Now, it's not only myself, but there are 5 other landowners in the area proposed for the zoning change, and I think it's not in the best interest of the ratepayers. It's certainly not in my best interest, And if the council wants to lock up private land into reserves, then I strongly believe that the council should either purchase the land or take over the management of the land at their expense, and the landowners shouldn't have to bear the costs themselves. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Glenda King.
Glenda King, 5 Scott Street. I'm not speaking for or against particular plans, but rather to draw to your attention my particular concern that it would appear, and from my correspondence with Ms Fordry as well, that under the new proposed Launceston planning scheme, there is no longer any provision for scenic protection as we know it, and this appears to be a removal statewide as well. That, to me, is a particular red or green button pressed, whatever you like to consider it, that we have a conflict here. On the one hand, as a council, you have very enlightenedly declared a climate emergency. On the other hand, you have the potential Launceston planning scheme of the future, in the immediate future, that will have no scenic protection for urban areas. And as I enunciated before, the greatest threat to loss of green cover is on development, and I am not anti-development. I am for good planning and appropriate development, and that doesn't mean no development. I built on my own land, so I would be a hypocrite if I said I was anti-development. I am not. I am very much for appropriate development. And I think one of the key things that you need to be aware of is the significant and increased potential loss of green cover in this city and the danger that presents to Launceston. Alderman Dawkins mentioned this, of the heat sinks that are out in outer suburbs that have no green cover. So I would endorse you and encourage you to please consider a local area schedule that gives us protection for scenic areas, for green cover, and encourages people to not hate trees, to not consider them a liability, but to actually consider them an asset, and collectively to actually contribute to making this city far more livable than it is, far more amenable. And green cover can do that. Anyone who goes into St George's Square Park and steps under the oaks on a hot day...
Thank you. Your time is up again.
...knows those drop by 8 or so degrees.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's all the speakers I have. Any other speakers? So we have item 15.3. Do we have a mover? Councillor Finlay, seconder. Councillor Harris. Question from Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Just in terms of understanding the process and the particular concerns that Mr Trethewey and others might have, notwithstanding a huge amount of work has gone into the consultation, the meetings and the information sessions and the correspondence, could the Director please just outline the process from here as we submit these to the relevant authority? Thanks.
Director Hurst. Clearly.
Thank you. So the process from here is really to initiate the planning scheme. So your endorsement today would be for us to submit it to the Planning Commission. They then consider it against the requirements in the legislation. They may have changes that they need to make. Then there'll be a formal consultation process which will go for 60 days. And that will be quite an extensive consultation with the community, and that will be the opportunity to engage in the process, and there may be changes from that point onwards as well.
Thank you so much for the response. So just to be clear, given we wanted our community to be as informed as possible, the additional step that we've taken ahead of the Planning Authority doing that is has benefited those residents, including Mr Trethewey and others who have contacted us, and they will be able to enter into further conversation with regard to their specific properties.
Yeah, that's correct. So the sending of the letters was outside of the statutory process, and it was an opportunity to sort of engage with the community forewarn them or foreshadow the work that we've done so far, so that when it is formally advertised, everyone is very aware and informed about the process and what the requirements are from then on.
Thank you. And my final question is, given the large number of responses that we received to that initiated correspondence, which was warmly received, I think, by the community, and certainly will be warmly received when they know that we didn't have to do it, we did it to initiate knowledge before the process began. Will those letters that we received be forwarded on, or will people need to reinitiate their own conversation with planning?
So during the formal advertising period, you would need to submit your representation again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Soward has a question.
Thanks, Mayor. Following on from the Deputy's question, and it sort of segues beautifully, Mr Trethewey has made some really, really good points, and he refers to the email from Mr Dingamance, which councillors have, and he says in his email, surprised that we're dealing with it today. In respect to 78 Corrin Street, there has been no response from Council to the letter sent to Claire 24 July, even though Claire's letter to owners invites owners to participate. That was probably covered there. I'm just wondering if there is any update from us to Mr Trethewey's question via Mr Dingamance's email sent at 9:57 a.m. today.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Listen, there are going to, when we went through the interim planning scheme, there were over 400 representations that we received to deal with specific matters of specific property issues, and I think that we'll obviously have a similar number when it gets into the statutory process. Now, really today is about initiating that process so we can actually get into that formal process and deal with the specific issues that property owners wish to raise and have responded to formally. I think today probably isn't about dealing with specific issues on specific properties. It's about actually getting into the process, initiating it so that we can resolve those into the future. So I respect the fact and am appreciative that we've actually had that identified to us as an issue. We've got forewarning. That's something that we need to address, and I think it would be wise that we write to all of the people that have actually submitted those concerns to outline what the process is for them to actually engage in the process, and that's something that we'll do following today's meeting. But I just think that we need to get into the process, deal with them through that structure, that formal process in the next, when we get to that hearing phase. So.
Thank you.
Thanks, General Manager, for the answer. I just wanted Mr Trethewey to be really assured of that, so thank you.
Question?
Yes, just a question. Based on the 400 inquiries or otherwise, did we make any changes to what we had proposed for what we've got now? So that, I realise that Mr Trethewey will obviously have to submit his again because it's now going to be too late, but I just sort of wondered, did we make changes or did we just simply go with what we had?
Director Hurst.
Thanks, Mayor. There were a couple of adjustments that were made, and we have absolutely no doubt that there will be more once it gets into the formal statutory process.
Councillor Finlay, you wish to speak?
Thanks, Mayor. I do on this one, and following the statements and questions and the questions from the table, I want to start not necessarily with a recommendation, but just an acknowledgement of the amount of work that's taken to get us to this point. As councillors, we've been getting briefings for over 2 years now as we've gone through this process, and I want to really acknowledge the way that you've taken us through that. You guys have had a mountain of work to do, and it's not unusual then to expect that we would have over 400, I think it was even 457 or something, wasn't it? It was a big number of submissions, and that might cause some really positive, actually. Some of those were really welcomed because they did highlight things that could be usefully changed. For the benefit of the community, and I'm going to call it a truckload of work that's happened. So over the last 2 years, we've been getting regular briefings on this, and we have pushed back on the Commission a number of times to include extra steps and take appropriate time to actually get good work done, which included that first round of public consultation. But it wasn't tabled at the last workshop we had, but in our councillors' rooms, we have an area where we can get access to documents to review before a meeting. And if I remember correctly, it's 5,000 pages of paper of the reports that are detailed out on page 49 and the attachments that you can see. So a lot of that was existing work that was reviewed and there was that challenge of how we're actually going to submit that. But before speaking to the item, I just want to acknowledge that you guys have done a really great job for us to bring us up to speed and keep us informed as the process has gone through, and to acknowledge that, that work's been exceptional. So thank you. Which brings us to the point of actually the formal process that we are determining that we're satisfied with what's being presented, and then we submit that. And we're submitting that for what most councils would be the first step in the process. It would be then that go out for the consultation and the hearings to occur. So we're satisfied with the understanding that we have at the moment that that is appropriate, and we're ready to submit that. And then we absolutely encourage, and that the General Manager has acknowledged that we could take that next step and to write to those people that have already engaged so that they are aware of the process. But sometimes we have tricky items at council, sometimes we have really simple items at council, sometimes we can be a bit sort of like afraid and want to hide behind the things that we do. But for this one, I'm really proud of the work we've done, and I'm really proud of you guys, and thankful for what you've done, and I'm looking forward to the community actually engaging. There will be moments that we have to work really hard to get resolution, but we want to be here to support those things to happen. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Look, I was happy to second this motion simply because we do have to start the process somewhere, and today is about initiating that great bulk of work. I've only been on the council for about 10 months, and certainly, as I say, we've had many updates in that time. To know that it's been ongoing for 2 years doesn't surprise me, and we've got to start somewhere, and you cannot wait till it's perfect before you submit it, because we'd never get there. So we've got to start the process, got to put it out there, let people have their say, as through the process that you've initiated, and if we then make changes, then that's what we make changes on. There will be many people who have questions that will simply be clarifying out of the 400, I'm sure, and in the end there'll be no change needed for them. They'll simply be understanding their new conditions. So I think well done to everyone who's done this work. It certainly is a very large body of work that we've been undertaken, so well done. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks. I too just want to acknowledge the plethora of work that's been undertaken and the educative role that we've taken in our community. And to send out 7,500 letters is a huge undertaking, and I think that will be appreciated by our community. And further, I just want to acknowledge taking that additional step to write back to those people. Again, a little bit of work will be certainly appreciated by the community, because many people, as we identified from those 400 that corresponded, they just didn't understand, as neither did we at the beginning of the process. So to help guide them and to understand which track they can take if they're still concerned or have queries will be appreciated.
Thank you. Deputy. Any other speakers? Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I'd rise to echo the words of my fellow councillors that, to commend the work that's been done, and to really recommend to the public to start to delve into the serious amount of work that is there, and that process of an entire municipality going through that work and doing what we do, but joining in that process to bring out all those issues is what this is about now. It's similar to the building height recommendations that were tabled at council that are going to go through a similar process, and I really do encourage every member of our community to dig deep and have a look. I'm just speaking a bit more loudly by the sounds of it, but I'll use that to my advantage and say for the public to dig deep and to really to go through it with a fine tooth comb and join the process. And thank you very much, officers.
Thank you, Councillor Walker, for that lifting or raising your voice. Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you. Notwithstanding all the gratitude from the table, of course, this is an enormous amount of work. It's obviously not just Launceston going through this, but it's a statewide planning scheme, and the provisions for each municipality have to be considered. It's been an interesting debate, I think, for Tasmania. There was a lot of talk at the beginning about how quickly things needed to be done, the speed that had to be done. We need these DAs in, and we need them all approved, and let's cut all the red tape. But we now know, actually, that's incredibly dangerous. We can see in places on the mainland how the difficulty that there is if we don't really deeply consider our planning scheme for the benefit of the whole community and for the future. Because if we try and rush these things, we'll end up with really poorly designed and built buildings. So I'm very grateful that we've taken the time that we've needed to ensure that we get the right planning scheme, and I hope that people do engage with the next part of the process. It's not easy, it's dry, it's complicated, it's deep, and it will take an enormous amount of work for people to really dive into it and put their positions forward. But I hope that they do find that when they do that, they are listened to and they are considered. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Finlay, wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. We'll now go back to the beginning, or where we were in the agenda. Mayor's announcements. Just to mention that I did attend on Saturday the 24th the City Proms Beats, Brews and Barbecues, and that was great in the laneway. Those up down from Auckland's there, it was fantastic. So congratulations to City Prom on that, and there was a lot of people there. And I met quite a few that were there, so well done for that. To initiate the laneways is good. And it obviously was an exciting week with the launch of City Deal's annual progress report and My Place, My Plan, which in my future in the community, and it was really great to see many of the community members out supporting that. The one that I do want to mention to General Managers, a thank you came through from City Park Radio again, because I went to their AGM, and they really do thank Council for the use of the property, which is a beautiful property near the City Park there, but they're so thankful for the work, not only of the use of the property, but for the support they get from our staff as well for help maintaining where needed, and they're always very cooperative. Our staff are very cooperative with them, so they very much appreciate that. And then Junction is on, opening night last night, so I encourage people in our community, if you haven't got your tickets, it's probably getting late on some shows, but get involved, get along, enjoy what will be a great few days in the beautiful city, Princess Square, beautiful City Park, the Princess Square, not the City Park. Thank you. Any other council reports, Deputy?
Thank you, Mayor. 4 items that I would like to share with the council. It was a real pleasure last week to attend the Launceston College STEAM Day. STEAM, development of STEM, putting the A into STEM there. But it was an incredible showcase, and you know that I'm on the College Association as a representative of this council. But to see the interactive way that teachers and students were able to communicate science, technology, the arts, in a way that was really, really attractive to the high schools and primary school students that were there, it was incredible. And Mayor, I know you were there and others were there as well, to see the joy, to see the connection, to see the pure pleasure that was coming from all the students' faces as they engaged in all of those activities was incredible. So congratulations to the science teachers and to Principal Vicky Mackerel and all of the students there who are doing great work. I wanted to mention the Interweave Arts Association's annual Remade, which occurred last weekend. It was an incredible showcase event, a fashion parade, if you like, of materials that have been salvaged and repurposed into amazing creations. And Interweave, through its work with people who have a disability in our community, together with those that don't, working collaboratively to showcase the power of the arts, the power of community in celebrating the wonderment that can come from those creations was incredible. One show completely sold out and another well attended, and I know Mayor and Alderman Stosenchek together with Councillor Stosenchek together with Councillor McKenzie certainly enjoyed that show. The third thing I wanted to mention was the YAG Youth Council meeting that occurred, and whilst not listed in the Mayor's announcements, was chaired by the Mayor and attended by a great number, perhaps a record number of councillors from around the table, and the 5 young people that represented the Youth Action Group did a stellar job. They were articulate, they were prepared, they were researched, and they were excellent and did themselves and the other young people of Northern Tasmania and Launceston proud. So well done to them and to our Youth Development Officer Claudia Taylor, who does such a great job. And finally, as the Mayor mentioned, item number 4 is Junction. It's incredible to see the growth of Junction, and now having found its home in Prince S's Square is incredible. It really is at home in that square, and to see the way that they have worked with Greg, the artistic director, together with Liz Frankham and her very dedicated board is incredible, because, you know, we all know events and staging events and attracting sponsorship and funding for them is very challenging. And what they've done over the years is found resourceful, innovative ways to grow their event, to see their own event find its pathway alongside all of the other huge cultural events that we have in Launceston. So all credit to them, and get along. It's accessible, it's open, it's family friendly, and it deserves our support as one of the signature events that this council supports.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Gibson. Any other councillor reports? No? Questions by councillors? Councillor Harris?
Yep, there we go. I've got two questions, and I do thank the Director for her response regarding my question regarding the number of staff parking spots that were provided for the business operating out of the Meadow Mews Shopping Centre. There are in fact 50 spots as part of the development application. So my first question is, now that we know how many spots there are, how are progress of the discussions with the shopping centre owner or manager and the car park operator, so that the staff who do work in the Meadow Mews businesses are able to access the 50 spots approved under the development application? So I know you will take that on notice unless you've got the answer prepared.
I was just going to say, I don't believe we have followed up with them yet, but we certainly will be.
No worries, thank you. And my second question is, and I guess this could be a start of a rolling one, I've been contacted and asked the same question about how many staff parking spots for businesses operating within the Kmart complex were approved for the development application for the Kmart shopping centre in Racecourse Crescent. So I'm sure you again
We'll take that
on notice, and that's thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from councillors? No, we'll move on then to Pedestrian Bike Committee meeting. Someone happy to move 12.1? Councillor Harris moves, seconded. Councillor Stosenchek. Councillor Harris, wish to speak to it?
Yes, I'd better. Unfortunately, I wasn't at this meeting because we had our Leadership Development Day. Here, Councillor Mackenzie ran that. There's 3 items that have come up as part of the Pedestrian and Bike Committee as shown here, and that is the, I guess, the involvement of the committee in the Tomorrow Together project and the opportunities for sustainable transport that Tomorrow Together presents to the committee. We're also working on a proposition by the University of Tasmania to have an active transport day in the CBD of Launceston, similar to Lavaria. I don't know how you quite say that, but it's a thing in LA, hence the LA in the middle, which was held in Los Angeles in August. That was really about showing the citizens of Los Angeles how to use their existing roadways, but not in cars, so encouraging active transport in bikes and things like that. So we are working on something with the university for that for later on in October. And also the T-Bug were going to submit a community grant request for Bike Week, I think so. 27th, is that? Did you say 18th?
I think it'll be next year sometime.
Yeah, I do tend to agree with you, but I wasn't at the meeting to hear that part of the conversation. Okay. I'll have another one shortly.
Thank you. Any other? Councillor Stojic? No. Deputy Mayor?
I'm sorry to ask this, but I do think it's important because the 27th of October is the date that that Mr Mainsbridge from university is now kind of working towards, notwithstanding that it is the 5th of September and that the chair isn't not necessarily here and able to respond. Are we aware of that idea moving from discussion phase at this meeting into a actionable item, or is it still very much in the discussion phase?
I'd say it's in the discussion stage. My knowledge of it all. Director Eberhard.
I believe it's still in the discussion phase, and given the logistics involved, I find it unlikely that we would be able to run such an event on that date.
Thank you. A subsequent question is, given my meeting with Mr Mainsbridge last week, could an officer please make contact with him and outline that that date is perhaps a goal rather than a set date?
Will do.
Thank you. Any other further questions or speakers for this item? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 12.2, Emergency Management Committee. Moved Councillor Cox, seconded Councillor Soward. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Cox?
I will, yeah. Well, it's pretty self-explanatory. The one item that I did want to mention in the past is always been an issue with domestic animals. And it's good to see that the committee has now endorsed an amended emergency animal centre plan. So problems of the past hopefully will not be problems of the future. Otherwise, the animals will now have somewhere to go and be looked after. So that's good. I also would note that we have a new emergency management officer in the name of Stephen Launceston, and we welcomed him for his first meeting also.
Thank you. Councillor Soward? Any further councillors wish to speak? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 13.1, Council Workshop Report. Moved Councillor Finlay, seconded Councillor Dawkins. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Finlay? Councillor Dawkins, wish to speak to it? Any councillor wish to speak to it? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. We then go to 15.1, Small Event Sponsorship Round. We'll have a few. We're going to do it in bits by. Oh, I shouldn't say bits, but one line at a time. No, do the whole lot. Do the package. Oh, who's moving then? Something. What are you moving? 15.1, 2 and 3, or 15.1 and 2? Is there a seconder? Councillor Soward, thank you. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Cox? Councillor Soward?
Very self-explanatory.
Oh, you have to leave then. And 2. No, you move both together. Oh, you're doing 15.1, 1 and 2. Oh, sorry, I thought 15.1 and sorry. I was hoping you're doing both together. Okay, I'm with you now. Oh, very enthusiastic. So, any other further discussion on 15.1, 1 and 2, Deputy Mayor?
Just to say that, given I may not get the chance to speak to 15.2, as it seems, I want to say that the event sponsorship program is a really imperative part of what this council does. And the opportunity to support, to nurture, to initiate events and to add to the cultural diversity of our city, culture in the broadest spectrum, referring to sports, food, all manner of cultural undertakings should not be underestimated. We plough a significant amount of dollars into events, and Mr Mayor, the work that the former events officer, Cherie, undertook in this area was exceptional. Very important what I'm saying, really important. Cherie didn't over-service, she provided an exceptional service. And this is one of the things that our organisation receives great kudos from, our work in this area. The support that we're able to provide, the referencing to other funding pools, and the opportunity to navigate the council systems onto other staff who work in the directorate should not be underestimated. So it's a considerable amount of money. The return that we get is threefold, and the I guess the vibrant community that this supports is appropriate to 15.1, 1.2 and 15.2. It should not be underestimated, so I commend the list as provided.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. Any other speakers? Councillor Cox, you wish to close? I will put the motion. Good. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. That is all councillors present. That is carried. Thank you. So now we go on to 15.2, and some may return. I was confused there. So do we have a motion for 15.2, the whole lot or in part? Moved. Councillor Soward, seconded Councillor Stojanczek. Councillor Soward, wish to speak to it?
Yeah, just to say, Mr Mayor, and I know that Councillor Gibson would say that if he was here, is that we have some wonderful events in the city. We can see we spread the love around and support those events. They bring a whole variety of flavours and opportunities for things in our city. And just wanted to note the hard work of our Major Avant sponsorship group, who obviously take the time to assess those. But some very worthwhile recipients there, and we look forward to those events coming to the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stojanczek. Question, Councillor Walker.
I will ask a question. I have volunteered at Panama Festival in the past. Should I excuse myself from this particular?
Too late now. No.
It's too late. Well, I can walk out the door as we speak.
No, you're not on the executive.
No, I'm not. No.
That's all right. Any other speakers or confessions? Oh, now, Councillor Soward, do you wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. Thank you. We can get the Deputy Mayor back here. Oh, sorry. We're moving on. I think we have a motion to move into closed council. Move Councillor Finlay, second to Councillor Soward, that we move into closed council and consider the decisions. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That's all councillors present that are listening. That's carried. Okay, I'm going to close council.
Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time.
Councillor Soward, second Councillor Cox. All those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. We'll close the meeting. Thank you very much.
Streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks.